often like to talk about sacred literature, but I think most of us would agree that the starfish story that Lisa just shared would be amongst our sacred texts. It ignites something in us. We recognize ourselves in this text. And I think that's because ever since William Ellery Channing articulated a theology of salvation by character, we have been like the boy on the beach. So what is this salvation of character? Now, at the time that Channing lived, the dominant theology around salvation was predestination, which said, God knows if you're saved or not. You have nothing to do with it. And so the most you could do is hope that you were on the list. And William Ellery Channing said, that doesn't make much sense. It doesn't make much sense. Why would the Holy One give us a brain to think and reason? Why would the Holy One give us a heart to feel empathy? Why would the Holy One give us a body in which we could act in the world if we weren't meant to recognize suffering, to come up and recognize something that could help make a difference, and then move our bodies into creating that difference? God wouldn't have done all those things if we weren't meant to be actors in this part of doing good. And so Channing said instead, I bet what the Holy did is gave us all that we needed to be good people, good hearts, good minds, an ability to make a difference. And instead, God wants to see what we do with it. And so you're going to have an opportunity to act out your goodness by helping others in the world. And so ever since then, Unitarians and then Unitarian Universalists have looked for a way to help others, in part because they revealed our own goodness. And there's no better or greater act of service than saving another's life. And so the starfish story has a resonance to us. And of course, it's not just about starfish. We do this in other ways, and even more meaningful and challenging ways. There's a ministry called No More Deaths, No Más Muertos, which is an official ministry from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson, Arizona. And in southern Arizona and in northern Mexico along that border, they provide humanitarian aid, i.e., they go out into the desert all throughout the year, but certainly in weeks that have had temperatures like we have had here in the hundreds. And along different routes, they put out water bottles, sunscreen, tarps for shade, first aid kits. They do search and rescue. So when they find out that some people have been left behind in the desert, they send out teams to find them. They set up humanitarian tents to help them recover. And they provide legal aid. Now, they know that the migration crisis on our border, that includes refugees, is too large for any one group to solve. And it's not a replacement for legislative reform or national policy change, but it is something. And so, like Lisa was invoking earlier, there was a Unitarian minister over 100 years ago, Edward Everett Hale, who said, I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but I could do something. And just because I can't do everything doesn't mean, just because I can't do everything, I will do the something I can do. And so when we recognize that we can do something, save a life, provide aid, act compassionately, let us act. Let it be.
Lisa, have we forgotten about the other starfish?
There was another starfish in there.
There wasn't, maybe there's more. Maybe there's another starfish story.
I think maybe there is.
Oh, good. Because people were wondering why I didn't complete my sermon. It was so short.
There is a poem called Starfish, and it is by Mary Oliver. In the sea rocks, in the stone pocket under the tide's lip, in water dense as blindness, they slid like sponges, like too many thumbs. I knew this, and what I wanted was to draw my hands back from the water. What I wanted was to be willing to be afraid. But I stayed there. I crouched on the stone wall while the sea poured its harsh song through the sluices, while I waited for the gritty lightning of their touch, while I stared down through the tides leaving where sometimes I could see them, their stubborn flesh lounging on my knuckles. What good does it do to lie all day in the sun, loving what is easy? It never grew easy. But at last I grew peaceful. All summer my fear diminished as they bloomed through the water like flowers, like flecks of an uncertain dream, while I lay on the rocks, reaching into the darkness, learning little by little to love our only world.
Reverend Fred Muir, our minister emeritus, said, people always need to hear poems twice. So I'm going to read it again. And if it's useful to you, I invite you to close your eyes so you could picture it more fully. Starfish by Mary Oliver. In the sea rocks, in the stone pockets, under the tide's lip, in the water dense as blindness, they slid like sponges, like too many thumbs. I knew this, and what I wanted was to draw my hands back from the water. What I wanted was to be willing to be afraid. But I stayed there. I crouched on the stone wall while the sea poured its harsh song through the sluices, while I waited for the gritty lightning of their touch, while I stared down through the tides leaving, where sometimes I could see them, their stubborn flesh lounging on my knuckles. What good does it do to lie all day in the sun, loving what is easy? It never grew easy, but at last I grew peaceful. All summer my fear diminished as they bloomed through the water like flowers, like flecks of an uncertain dream, while I lay on the rocks reaching into the darkness, learning little by little to love our only world. Unitarian Universalists also agree that all of Mary Oliver can be our sacred literature. There was a line in the movie World War Z, I haven't read the book, but I'm sure it's in there, and the whole plot and everything is not relevant, but there's this line that really is interesting, and it says, specifically about Mother Nature, i.e. us, that sometimes within our strengths lie our weaknesses. Sometimes in our greatest strengths lie our weaknesses. If our greatest strength is the work of saving the world, then perhaps there is a little bit of our greatest weakness as well. What do I mean by that? Unitarian Universalists have been sort of on the forefront of showing up for so many different social justice movements and efforts throughout the centuries. And yet, we've been coming to recognize something else. As we've moved into doing anti-racism work more fully, more deeply, more intrapersonally as well as interpersonally, we've begun to realize that actually our orientation towards saving is complex. Sometimes we have realized that we've moved into action before we have moved into affiliation. Sometimes we've moved we've centered achievements instead of centering people. Sometimes we have moved towards, we have not reflected before we have led. And what this means is sometimes our efforts were not what was wanted at all. Sometimes they were unwelcomed, sometimes we achieved something but at the cost of a partnership, sometimes other people's leaderships was never given space. And so Unitarian Universalists have sometimes sort of stepped back to try to say, we still have a desire to contribute to the world, but how are we going to go about doing that? Are we always the right ones to do that? And so this urge for us to go out and meet the hunger of the world, or go out and save people, and go out and be the leaders of the revolution is causing us a little bit of thoughtfulness. We've stumbled sometimes. So what do we do with this yes and? Yes, we want to save, and sometimes we're not good at saving. We live into that complexity. We live into that complexity. And this is where that second Starfish poem comes in. Because one of the things I want to put out there is not every moment is a starfish on the beach moment. Not every moment is a moment asking for salvation. There's other moments. In fact, most other moments are not that. And so what holy work can those moments be about? I think Mary Oliver answers it. It's about love. Those moments can be about loving the only world that exists. How do we love the only world that exists? The philosopher Martin Buber talks about the I-thou relationship. The I-thou relationship. And the I-thou relationship exists or is created when one shows up actively and authentically. When both parties do that, they show up fully. Fully in presence, fully in honesty, fully in directness, fully in intensity, fully in ineffability. And when both parties or both beings or both peoples are showing up thus, something is created. Martin Buber calls it the in-between. We call it the beloved community. That deep connection where one's wholeness, one's whole humanity, one's life exists fully. You're in that fullness and you're aware of the fullness and holiness of the other. The I and thou. The I and thou. I see this in the Mary Oliver poem, how she shows up in that presence and intensity, curiosity and wonder, when she takes time to lie on rocks and reach her arm under and places it next to these starfish, who then choose to crawl over her, where they explore this touch this holy encounter in an act of mutuality. Such encounters are powerful things. You never quite forget them. I think you might even remember some. We are good at those encounters too. We have a prison ministry program. It's been on hiatus for about 2 years during the pandemic, but it's existed for 20 years. If it was on hold for 20 years, I don't know that we could say we have it anymore. And this prison ministry is so much about the I and thou relationship. We have a curriculum. We have some skills that we hope to impart around nonviolent communication and managing stress and de-escalating one's interactions to move in a more positive way. But at the core of it, it's about showing up week after week, fully authentically how you are as a facilitator, and to allow the men participating in the program to show up fully and authentically how they are as men who have done harm, and as children who have been harmed, and of people who are trying to be in right relationship with themselves and in others. A few weeks ago, one of these men had a resentencing hearing. And we don't have the results of that hearing yet, but it was a big moment with a lot of truth-telling and a lot of empathy and honesty and presence. And I will tell you, over the 4 days that this hearing was taking place in the first week, over 20 different people who had been part of our prison ministry at some point showed up. They drove in from various different states. They came day after day because they had experienced that I-thou relationship. And they knew that showing up fully mattered. Some therapists and people who study the value of therapy sometimes like to evaluate the positive impact differences of different methodologies. And that's a whole other line of discussion. But one of the things that lies beneath it all is there's a difference that's made in the relationship between the therapist and the person who's being counseled. The relationship itself can heal. There is a healing, a restoration, almost a salvation that can happen in the I-thou relationship. So let us live into the yes and. There are moments, like the boy saw on the beach, where it is clear that one can be of service, one can offer aid and assistance, and that will make a holy difference in another's life. The starfish wants to be returned to the ocean. When I was a hospital chaplain, we used to joke that when there's a car accident, the people in the car wanted to see was not the chaplain who would come and say, "Are there any resources from your childhood you'd like to draw upon now?" No, what they want is the doctors and the EMTs to help them. There's a moment to act, and it's important to recognize those moments. And then there are the moments where we recognize that this isn't about saving, it's about connecting, it's about relating, it's about showing up and building that holy connection. My dear ones, may we be in such a way with ourselves and with each other that the moments of saving and the moments of connecting flow like one into each other. May we live in such a way that it's indistinguishable between our connection and how We provide mutual